Ravenwood Estate had always stood apart from the surrounding countryside, a sprawling mansion perched atop a lonely hill, shrouded in mist and legend. Locals whispered that no family had ever truly thrived within its walls. One by one, inhabitants vanished or succumbed to madness. Some said the estate itself was alive, feeding on fear and despair. Dr. Adrian Cole, a renowned psychologist specializing in the human mind and its hidden fears, had arrived at Ravenwood to study its notorious past. Officially, he was there to examine the latest heir, Samuel Hawthorne, who had begun exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. Unofficially, Adrian had a personal fascination to understand how isolation, guilt, and the weight of history could warp the mind, and perhaps, if possible, prove that some legends were more than mere myth. From the moment Adrian stepped onto the estate's grounds, an unsettling sensation gripped him. The iron gates groaned in protest as he pushed them open, and the gravel path seemed to stretch unnaturally before him, leading toward the mansion like a corridor through time. The trees surrounding the estate were gnarled, their shadows casting shapes that resembled grasping hands. Inside, the mansion was cold, far colder than the autumn air outside should allow. Portraits of the Hawthorne lineage lined the walls, their painted eyes following Adrian as he moved through the grand halls. A faint odor of decay lingered in the air, and the floorboards groaned underfoot, though he seemed to be alone. Samuel greeted him, pale and hollow-eyed, yet cordial. He spoke in stilted sentences, often pausing as though listening to something Adrian could not hear. The estate seemed to respond to Samuel's presence. Doors would slam, chandeliers would sway, and faint whispers floated through the corridors. Adrian began his sessions, trying to uncover the root of Samuel's terror. Samuel spoke of shadows moving independently, of faces appearing in mirrors that were not his own, and of voices repeating his deepest fears. Adrian, trained in rational explanation, considered possibilities hallucinations, trauma, isolation. But each explanation felt increasingly insufficient as events escalated beyond logic. On the third night, Adrian wandered the mansion alone, reviewing his notes. The air was thick, the silence almost suffocating. He heard faint whispers calling his name. Following them, he entered the east wing, long abandoned and sealed for decades. The wallpaper was peeling, the furniture covered in dust, yet Adrian felt an oppressive presence, as if unseen eyes were studying him. A sudden movement caught his attention, a figure at the end of the hallway, pale and indistinct. When he approached, it vanished, leaving only a chilling echo of laughter. His pulse raced, but his curiosity compelled him onward. He found a study, the room locked in decades past. The door creaked open, revealing journals and letters from the Hawthorne ancestors. One entry stood out: Ravenwood does not forgive. The walls remember every thought, every whisper of fear. To dwell here is to become part of it, until the estate decides your fate. As Adrian read, the mansion seemed to breathe, the walls pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, forming shapes that mimicked his own movements. A mirror reflected not his image, but a vision of Samuel screaming, eyes wide with terror, a hand reaching from the glass, as though trying to pull Adrian in. Night deepened, and Adrian felt the mansion testing him. Doors that once led to hallways now opened into unfamiliar rooms. Staircases twisted upon themselves. He could hear footsteps echoing his own, whispers growing louder, repeating secrets he had never spoken aloud. The estate seemed alive, a sentient entity feeding on the psychological fragility of its inhabitants. In a hidden chamber, Adrian found remnants of prior victims' journals, torn clothing, personal items, all belonging to those who had vanished over the centuries. Each item radiated the lingering fear and despair of its owner. Adrian realized that the estate did not merely haunt its inhabitants, it consumed their psyche, distorting reality until madness took hold. Samuel appeared suddenly, his eyes hollow, voice barely a whisper. "They told me I was cursed, but I don't know what's real anymore. The house, it speaks." Adrian tried to reassure him, but as he did, the walls shifted, and both men found themselves trapped in an endless corridor lined with mirrors. Every reflection showed variations of their own fears, grotesque, distorted, and alive. Adrian's rational mind began to fracture. Memories of his past merged with visions from the mansion, creating impossible sequences where time had no meaning. The estate forced him to confront guilt, shame, and fear, magnified to unbearable proportions. Shadows twisted into faces of lost loved ones, pleading, accusing, mocking. Hours, or perhaps days, passed indistinguishably. Adrian attempted to destroy objects, light candles, and break mirrors, but each act only strengthened the mansion's grip. The walls whispered that resistance was futile. Yet, he noticed a pattern. The estate reacted violently to fear, but hesitated when met with clarity of purpose and courage. Summoning his remaining resolve, Adrian confronted the mansion directly. He shouted against the walls, naming his fears aloud, acknowledging guilt, and asserting control over his perception. The shadows writhed, the whispers grew deafening, but slowly, as if reluctant, the mansion began to relent. The ordeal culminated in the grand hall. The chandelier swung violently, portraits screamed silently, and the air thickened with oppressive presence. Adrian and Samuel stood together, grounding each other in reality. With a final act of defiance, Adrian smashed the largest mirror, and the mansion shuddered, releasing a scream that echoed across the estate and into the night. When dawn arrived, the estate seemed calm, deceptively serene. Samuel's eyes were clearer, and Adrian's mind, though shaken, remained intact. The mansion had tested them, but they had endured. Yet both understood that Ravenwood Estate was never truly gone. It lingered in the shadows, patient, observing, ready for the next visitor to challenge its psychological dominion. Even years later, when Adrian recounted the events, he noticed subtle signs of the estate's lingering presence. A shadow in the corner of his vision, a whisper in the wind, mirrors that seemed to reflect something beyond reality. Ravenwood was eternal, and its hunger for the mind never ceased.